history doesn't sleep. Welcome to History Speaks, the show where we bring a figure from the past into the present and ask them to make sense of the world we've built. This week, 5 stories from the same land that has never stopped bleeding. 1. Israel has launched ground operations in southern Lebanon. 1 million people, 1 in 5 Lebanese, have been forced from their homes. The Israeli defense minister has declared they will not return until Israel says so. 2. The US-Israel war on Iran has entered its 3rd week. 6 American service members have been killed in Iraq after Iran struck 3 US military bases with missiles and drones. 3. Trump has demanded that America's allies send warships to the Strait of Hormuz to help reopen it. The allies have, quietly, declined. 4. At the 98th Academy Awards in Hollywood, the war followed the cameras. A Palestinian filmmaker was denied a visa. An actor called for a free Palestine from the stage. And the Best Picture winner was called One Battle After Another. 5. Anti-Islamic rhetoric from Republican politicians is rising sharply inside the United States. An Afghan asylum seeker who worked with US Special Forces died in ICE custody within 24 hours of being detained. 5 stories, 1 land, 1 guest who fought there, and who, 9 centuries ago, stood exactly where today's headlines are set. Our guest was born in 1137 in Tikrit, a city in what is today Iraq, to a Kurdish military family. He rose through the Zengid dynasty, unified Egypt and Syria under his rule, and founded the Ayyubid Sultanate. By 1187, he had done what no Muslim ruler had managed in 88 years. He retook Jerusalem from the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin. He did not massacre the city's inhabitants. He offered ransom and, for those who could not pay, release. He allowed Christian pilgrims to continue visiting the holy sites. His enemies, including Richard the Lionheart, who fought him in the Third Crusade, called him the greatest knight in the world. He died in 1193, leaving almost no personal wealth. Everything had been given away. He was buried in Damascus, where his tomb stands today. What makes Saladin extraordinary for this conversation is this. He was a man who fought the Crusades not as a war of extermination, but as a war of principle. He understood the difference between an enemy and a people. He believed that honor in war was not a weakness, but a strategy. Saladin, welcome to 2026.
2026. They're still fighting over the same hills, the same cities, the same rivers. I recognize the names. Tyre, Sidon, the Litany, Beirut. I wish I did not. Let us begin.
Our first story. On March 16th, Israel launched what it called limited and targeted ground operations in southern Lebanon. Within hours, it became clear this was the beginning of something larger. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz announced that hundreds of thousands of Shiite residents of southern Lebanon will not return to their homes south of the Litani River until the security of the residents of the north is guaranteed. By the end of the week, more than 1 million Lebanese, nearly 1 in 5 people in the entire country, had been displaced. At least 886 people were killed between March 2nd and March 16th, including 111 children and 38 health workers. The Israeli military says it is targeting Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group and political party backed by Iran. The declared goal is to create a buffer zone south of the Litani River to protect northern Israeli towns from rocket attacks. Lebanon's prime minister has denounced the operations as violations of sovereignty and international law. The United Nations has called the displacement catastrophic. Saladin, you fought in this same territory. You crossed these same rivers. You know what it means to move an army through southern Lebanon and what it means for the people who live there. What do you see?
I see the oldest strategy in warfare. Make the land uninhabitable, empty it of its people, and then call it a buffer zone. In my time, we called it the scorched earth, Hark al-Ard. Armies have used it since before history was written. It is effective. It is also a confession. It is a confession that you cannot hold the land with soldiers alone, that the people themselves are the enemy, not just the fighters, but the families, the farmers, the children. When I took Jerusalem in 1187, I was urged by some of my commanders to do the same, to empty the city, to make it ours by making it uninhabitable for those who had held it. I refused, not because I was gentle. I was not always gentle, but because I understood something that every serious commander eventually learns. A city you have emptied is not a city you have won. It is a wound, and wounds do not stay empty. They fill with resentment, with memory, with the children of the displaced who grow up knowing only one story. 1 million people forced from their homes. 1 million people who will not forget who moved them. The Litany River. I know that river. I crossed it many times. It is not a border. It is a line that warriors draw on a map and then ask civilians to respect. Tell me, the minister who said the people will not return until Israel says so, does he believe this is the end of a war or the beginning of an occupation? Because those are two very different problems, and history does not confuse them, even when politicians do. I spent much of my life fighting the Crusader states. Outre-mer, they called it, beyond the sea. Do you know why they ultimately failed, despite holding Jerusalem for nearly a century? It was not because of my army. It was because they never stopped being strangers. They built castles and called it belonging. They controlled the roads and called it peace. But they never understood the land, and the land never accepted them. A buffer zone is not security. It is a postponement. The question is never, can you empty the land? The question is always, then what?
Our second story. The US-Israel war on Iran has entered its third week. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that it had struck 3 US military bases in the region with missiles and drones. 6 American service members have been killed in Iraq, bringing the total US military deaths to at least 9. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi flatly denied that Iran had requested a ceasefire, directly contradicting claims made by President Trump. Araghchi said, "No, we never asked for a ceasefire, and we have never asked even for negotiation. We are ready to defend ourselves as long as it takes." Meanwhile, in Washington, questions have been raised about the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. He has not appeared on camera. Israel believes he was seriously wounded in the initial strikes. Some analysts question whether he is truly in charge or whether he is even alive. The US Energy Secretary said the conflict will certainly come to an end in the next few weeks. Iran said it will fight as long as it takes. Saladin, you fought a long war against forces that were also convinced it would end quickly. The Crusaders believed God was on their side and that the Holy Land would yield. You believed otherwise. What does a third week tell you about a war?
A third week tells me the first week was a lie. Every commander who starts a war tells his soldiers it will be swift. This is necessary. A soldier who believes the war will be long fights differently, more carefully, more fearfully. The lie of the short war is a tool of mobilization. But by the third week, the lie has worn through. The soldiers know. The families know. The markets know. Only the leaders, sometimes, still believe it or pretend to. 6 Americans dead. Let me be precise about what this means. In war, deaths are not only a human tragedy, they are a political measurement. 6 deaths in 3 weeks means the war is real enough to bleed Americans. And a war that bleeds Americans does not remain abstract for long. I lost men at Hatton. I lost commanders whom I loved as brothers. And I will tell you something that few military histories record honestly. Every death changes the calculus. Not because the commander becomes timid, but because the men around him begin to calculate differently. They ask, "What are we dying for?" Not in philosophy, in specifics. What piece of this? What day? What outcome justifies this particular man in this particular place? The Iranian foreign minister says they will fight as long as it takes. Your energy secretary says it ends in a few weeks. One of them has stood in a war. The other has stood at a podium. And the question of the new supreme leader, whether he is alive, whether he is in command. This is the most dangerous uncertainty in the situation. I know this from my own experience. When a leader's status is uncertain, two things happen simultaneously. His followers fight harder, because doubt about his fate becomes a source of ferocity. They fight to prove he's worth fighting for. And his enemies become reckless, because they believe the head has been cut and the body must fall soon. Both of these beliefs are usually wrong. And the blood between those two wrong beliefs, that blood is real.
Our third story. President Trump has publicly scolded America's allies for not helping to protect oil tankers from Iran and secure the Strait of Hormuz. He urged other countries to send warships to join the effort to reopen the critical shipping lane. The allies have largely declined. European nations have not committed forces. Japan, which depends on the Gulf for nearly 90% of its oil imports, has been silent. The G7 is discussing economic responses, reserve releases, sanctions, but not military ones. The reaction has been striking. America began this war without consulting its allies. It is now asking those same allies to share the military burden of a war they neither supported nor sanctioned. Saladin, you were a master of coalition. You united the fractured Islamic world, Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, Yemen, into a coherent fighting force. You also dealt with Christian rulers who fought each other as much as they fought you. What does a commander learn when he asks for help and the answer is silence?
He learns the truth he should have known before he asked. Alliances are not created at the moment of need. They are built in the long years before need arrives. You build them with patience, with respect, with the understanding that your ally's interests are as real to him as yours are to you. I spent years, unifying the Muslim princes before I marched on Jerusalem. I negotiated, I corresponded, I made concessions I did not wish to make. I treated the Zengids who had once employed my family with more courtesy than they deserved. I did this because I understood that I could not take Jerusalem alone, and that to ask men to die for a cause, you must have first given them a reason to believe the cause is also theirs. America went to war with Iran without asking its allies, without consulting them, without giving them a stake in the decision. And now it is surprised that they will not share the cost. This is not ingratitude. This is logic. When Richard of England and I fought each other at Acre and Arsuf, we were enemies, but we negotiated. We sent gifts. We communicated through intermediaries. Because even enemies understand that a war without a possible end is a catastrophe for everyone. Your president calls his allies and scolds them. He has perhaps forgotten that an ally is not a subordinate. An ally is a sovereign who has chosen for his own reasons to stand beside you. Remove those reasons, and you stand alone. The Strait of Hormuz. I know what it means to control a choke point. The ports of Acre and Tyre were my choke points in the Third Crusade. Richard held them. It gave him enormous leverage. Iran understands this the way a man understands the knife at his throat. Not abstractly, viscerally. And the allies who are watching, Japan, France, Germany, they understand it too. They are calculating whether the cost of joining America is greater than the cost of watching America struggle alone. That is a rational calculation. Do not mistake silence for weakness. It may be wisdom.
Our fourth story. On March 15th, As bombs fell on Iran and Lebanon, Hollywood held its 98th Academy Awards ceremony. The night was shaped by the war from the beginning. A Palestinian filmmaker nominated for Best Documentary Short was denied a U.S. visa under new Trump administration travel restrictions. He could not attend. He sent a statement. A passport can be blocked, but not a voice. During the ceremony, an actor called for a free Palestine from the stage. Several presenters and winners made pointed political statements. Host Conan O'Brien navigated a night that was, as one review put it, on the edge. The Best Picture winner was Paul Thomas Anderson's film One Battle After Another, about a revolutionary fighting old enemies for the safety of his daughter. It won 6 awards. The title was noted by many commentators as an unintentional, or perhaps entirely intentional, summary of the world outside. Saladin. You were a figure of culture as well as war. You were a patron of scholars and poets. And you were the subject of intense fascination in the Christian West, even in your own lifetime. Romanticized, mythologized, studied. What do you see when culture and politics collide on the world's most watched stage?
I see something I recognize very well. In my time, the troubadours of Europe wrote songs about the Crusades. They celebrated the knights who went to fight us. They made the war into romance, into something noble and distant and beautiful. And on our side, the poets wrote of Jerusalem, of Al-Quds, of what had been taken. Poetry was how ordinary people, who had no armies, no kings, no power, kept the wound alive. A Palestinian filmmaker who cannot attend because a government has decided his passport is a threat. A passport, a document, a piece of paper that says, this person exists, this person belongs somewhere. They have taken more than his visa. They have tried to erase his presence from the moment his film, which tells the story they find uncomfortable, is being honored. But he said something important. A passport can be blocked, but not a voice. This is what I tried to understand about war. The siege can be broken, the castle can fall, but the story of who was here, who was displaced, who suffered, that story cannot be demolished. It travels. It finds new forms. It waits. The Best Picture. One battle after another. I am told this is about a revolutionary fighting old enemies for his daughter. Of course it is. Every war eventually becomes that story. Not about ideology, about the child standing behind you. I have been romanticized in the West. The Christian chroniclers called me a man of honor, the perfect knight. They said this as a way of explaining why they could not defeat me. It is easier to lose to a noble enemy than to an ordinary man. I was not a myth. I was a man with a strategy, a faith, and an obligation to the people who followed me. But I will tell you this. The stories that outlast wars are rarely told by the victors. They are told by those who survived, and by those who could not be silenced. That filmmaker's voice reached the world without him being in the room. That is not a small thing. That is history moving in real time.
Our final story. As the war in Iran and Lebanon continued, something else was happening inside the United States. PBS NewsHour reported a significant increase in anti-Islamic rhetoric from Republican politicians. Concerns were raised about religious hatred and potential violence. In Texas, a federal jury convicted 8 anti-ICE protesters on terrorism charges in a closely watched trial that raised fears over free speech and political repression. The FCC chair threatened to revoke broadcasters' licenses over their coverage of the Iran war. And an Afghan asylum seeker, who worked with U.S. Special Forces, died in ICE custody within 24 hours of being detained. He had a wife and 6 children. Saladin. You fought wars that were defined, in part, by religious identity. You fought Christian Crusaders. You ruled over Christian and Jewish populations in your territories. You have been both weaponized and humanized by religious history. What happens to a society when a foreign war begins to define who belongs inside it?
It breaks. Not immediately, not visibly. It breaks in the way a wall breaks. Slowly, in the places no one is watching, until one day the whole structure comes apart. I have seen this. I was born into a world where the Crusader states had been in the Holy Land for 2 generations. In that time, something strange had happened. Many of the Crusaders had become, in small ways, part of the land. They spoke Arabic. They traded with us. Their doctors learned from our doctors. Some of them privately respected what they found. And then a new wave of Crusaders would arrive from Europe, full of fresh outrage, with no memory of the accommodation that had been built. And they would tear it apart. A man who fought alongside American soldiers in Afghanistan. He carried weapons for them. He risked his life for them. He came to their country. He had 6 children, and he died in their custody in 24 hours, without trial. I do not know this man's name, but I know his category. He is the man who crossed the line that was supposed to separate us from them, and discovered that the line moved when it was no longer convenient. When I ruled Jerusalem after 1187, I had Christian subjects, Jewish subjects. I had scholars of every faith in my court. Not because I was a saint, I was not, but because I understood that a kingdom built on exclusion is built on sand. You can't wage a war abroad in the name of civilization and simultaneously prove at home that civilization does not apply to everyone. The contradiction does not stay hidden. It becomes the story. It is already becoming the story. The rhetoric against Muslims in America, I would ask one question of those who use it. When Richard of England and I met, and we did communicate, even as we fought, he asked me once what I thought of his crusade. I told him, I do not doubt your faith. I question your knowledge. A man who burns a mosque has not defeated an ideology. He has announced that he has run out of arguments. العدل أساس الملك. Justice is the foundation of rule. I believe this. I tried to practice it. I failed sometimes, but I never stopped believing it was the measure. A civilization that abandons justice in the name of security does not find security. It finds the very thing it feared.
Saladin, you have seen 5 stories from a world that is fighting over the same land, the same straits, the same questions of who belongs and who decides. Before we return you to Damascus, or wherever 8 centuries has placed you, is there anything you would leave with our listeners?
3 things. First, a war that displaces 1 million people does not end when the shooting stops. It ends, if it ends, when the last displaced family returns home and is not afraid. That is a different kind of war, and it takes longer, and it cannot be won with weapons. Second, the measure of a commander is not how he treats the enemy on the field. It is how he treats the people who are not fighting. The children, the farmers, the sick, the elderly, the prisoner. If you wish to know what a war is worth, look at what it does to those who have no part in it. Third, and this is the one I wish I had understood sooner. The land remembers everything. I have been in the ground for 800 years. The Litany River is still there. The walls of Jerusalem are still there. The olive trees are still there, some of them older than the Crusades. They were there before me, and they will be there after everyone fighting today is gone. Every act of violence is recorded in the memory of the people who witness it. Every act of mercy, too. The recordings do not fade. They become the next war's reasons. I took Jerusalem, and I chose mercy. Not because I was certain it was right, but because I could see far enough ahead to understand that cruelty would make the next chapter worse. I do not know if I succeeded. The history after me does not suggest I did, but I believed it was the only way to try. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Indeed, to God we belong, and to Him we shall return. I say this not as theology. I say it as a soldier who has buried too many men. May they find rest that the living have not yet earned.
Saladin, 800 years later and still the most instructive commander in the room. That is History Speaks for the week of March 16th, 2026. Next week, a new voice from across the centuries. Head to our YouTube community tab, Instagram or X to cast your vote. If this episode left you quieter than when you started, good. That is also the point. History Speaks. New episodes every Friday. On YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen. Until next week. The land remembers everything.